What I'm about to tell you about John Turturro was never meant to be public. In a moment of startling candor that sent shockwaves through Hollywood, one of America's most respected character actors made a comparison so provocative, so utterly controversial, that publicists have been working overtime to keep it buried. Why did John Turturro compare acting to sex work? The answer reveals more about the soul of this enigmatic artist than anything he's ever shared on screen. Between you and me, Turturro's confession wasn't just some offhand remark. It was a calculated, deliberate statement that exposes the raw underbelly of what actors truly experience in an industry built on selling fantasy. My industry source revealed to me that when Turturro wrote, directed, and starred in Fading Gigolo, he wasn't just making a film. He was crafting his most personal confession. What the tabloids don't know is that Turturro has been harboring these provocative views for decades, quietly observing the parallels between his profession and the world's oldest one. Both require you to perform intimacy on demand, he reportedly told a stunned journalist during an interview that was quickly scrubbed from publication. Both ask you to fake emotion for money. The truth finally exposed about Turturro's perspective changes everything we thought we knew about this intensely private actor. But to understand why this revelation matters so deeply, we need to go back to the beginning. Long before he became the cult favorite of the Coen brothers films, before his unforgettable turn as Jesus Quintana in The Big Lebowski, John Turturro was just a kid from Brooklyn with Italian immigrant parents who had no connection to Hollywood's glittering facade. They don't want this getting out, but Turturro's journey to stardom wasn't the fairy tale his official biography suggests. According to my sources who have known Turturro for decades, his early struggles in the industry left deep psychological wounds that informed his later controversial views. After graduating from the Yale School of Drama, Turturro found himself taking roles that required emotional exposure for minimal compensation. He felt the transaction was inherently unbalanced, my source confided. John was giving pieces of his soul while executives profited. This feeling of being emotionally exploited only intensified as his career progressed. Though Turturro never publicly acknowledged it until the Fading Gigolo press tour, those closest to him say he's long maintained that actors are essentially emotional prostitutes, selling access to their most intimate feelings and vulnerabilities for public consumption. But that's nothing compared to what happened next. During the making of Fading Gigolo, where Turturro plays a reluctant male escort alongside Woody Allen, something profound shifted in the actor's perspective. My exclusive source, who worked closely on the production, revealed that Turturro became obsessed with understanding the psychology of sex workers. He interviewed dozens of current and former escorts, my source whispered. Not just for research, but because he believed they were the only people who could truly understand what actors endure. The parallels Turturro discovered were startling. Both professions require performing vulnerability on command. Both involve faking pleasure and connection. Both demand the compartmentalization of one's true self from one's professional persona. And both, according to Turturro's controversial theory, extract an enormous emotional toll that outsiders can never fully comprehend. What they've been hiding from the public is that Turturro's performance in Fading Gigolo wasn't just acting. It was a deeply personal exploration of his own relationship with his craft. Every scene where my character struggles with the transactional nature of intimacy, he reportedly told a cast member, is really about my 30 years as an actor. The studio executives were horrified. When Turturro began speaking candidly about these parallels during early press interviews, panic erupted behind the scenes. There were emergency calls between publicists and producers, my industry insider revealed. They were terrified he was going to derail the entire promotional campaign by essentially saying actors are high-class prostitutes. But Turturro refused to be silenced. In a move that defied all conventional Hollywood wisdom, he doubled down on his controversial take during a film festival Q&A that has since become the stuff of industry legend. Acting and sex work both require you to access parts of yourself that should remain private, he told the stunned audience. Both ask you to manufacture intimacy that feels authentic, but is ultimately a transaction. The aftermath was immediate and severe. Several major publications mysteriously killed their planned profile pieces on Turturro. Future projects that had been all but confirmed suddenly entered development hell, and whispers began circulating that the respected actor had finally gone too far, crossing a line that threatened the carefully maintained illusion that actors are artists, not emotional laborers selling a service. Yet for all the attempts to suppress Turturro's provocative comparison, his words struck a chord with many fellow performers who have privately contacted him to express their agreement. My source, who has seen some of these messages, says that several A-list actors' names that would shock you have thanked Turturro for articulating something they've felt but never dared express. The truth, my insider revealed, is that many of Hollywood's biggest stars recognize the transactional nature of what they do, but are terrified to acknowledge it publicly. John became their unexpected spokesperson by breaking this unwritten code of silence. But the controversy surrounding Turturro's comments goes beyond just the acting profession. His words have forced uncomfortable questions about how we consume entertainment itself. If actors are indeed emotional sex workers, what does that make the audience? Are we not paying for the privilege of witnessing their manufactured vulnerability? Are we not complicit in this emotional exploitation? These questions have made Turturro's views particularly dangerous to an industry built on maintaining the illusion of authenticity. They don't want you to know that Turturro's comments have sparked quiet but intense debates in acting schools across the country, where professors are now grappling with the ethical implications of training young people for careers that may extract such a heavy psychological toll. What's especially fascinating about this controversy is how it illuminates Turturro's entire career in retrospect. Those bizarre, vulnerable performances in Coen Brothers films like Barton Fink and Miller's Crossing take on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Was Turturro actually commenting on the exploitation of performers all along? Was his unforgettable turn as a traumatized writer in Barton Fink really a metaphor for the actor's relationship with Hollywood? My sources close to the Coen brothers suggest they've known about Turturro's views for years and have subtly incorporated them into the characters they've written for him. Joel and Ethan have always understood John's complicated relationship with acting, one insider told me. They've given him roles that allow him to explore this tension between authenticity and performance. But the most shocking revelation came from someone who worked closely with Turturro on the set of The Big Lebowski. According to this source, Turturro's iconic character, Jesus Quintana, the bowling alley sex offender, was partially conceived as a dark commentary on the predatory nature of the entertainment industry itself. The character was flamboyant, performative, and deeply unsettling, my source explained. John saw him as representing the way Hollywood exploits vulnerability while pretending it's all just entertainment. If true, This casts Turturro's entire body of work in a revolutionary new light. It suggests that one of our most celebrated character actors has been engaged in a career-long stealth critique of his own profession, hiding his most controversial views in plain sight through the characters he portrays. The industry's reaction to Turturro's provocative comparison reveals just how threatening his perspective is to the status quo. There were actual meetings about how to contain the damage, my Hollywood insider confided. One studio executive suggested they should never work with him again, calling him a liability who doesn't understand the rules of the game. But what if Turturro understands the rules all too well? What if his willingness to speak this uncomfortable truth comes precisely from his intimate knowledge of how the system works? Between you and me, there's evidence suggesting Turturro's controversial take didn't emerge from naivety, but from decades of careful observation and personal experience. A former co-star who requested anonymity shared something with me that's never been reported before. After particularly emotional scenes, John would sometimes disappear for hours, they revealed. When he returned, you could tell he'd been crying. He once told me that each intense scene costs him something that he'll never get back. He said it was like selling pieces of his soul. This profound sense of loss, of giving away intimate parts of oneself for public consumption, lies at the heart of Turturro's controversial comparison. And it raises uncomfortable questions about the toll that great performances take on the performers themselves. When we praise actors for losing themselves in a role, are we actually celebrating a form of self-harm? Are we applauding their willingness to engage in emotional prostitution for our entertainment? Turturro's experiences making Fading Gigolo only deepened these convictions. My production source revealed that Turturro became increasingly withdrawn during filming of intimate scenes. After takes, he would sit alone looking almost shell-shocked, they told me. Once I overheard him muttering, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. We're selling ourselves piece by piece." The parallels Turturro drew weren't just philosophical musings, they were drawn from his lived experience. Both professions require you to disassociate, he reportedly told a cast member during a private moment on set. You learn to separate the you that performs from the you that goes home at night. Otherwise, you couldn't survive it. This ability to compartmentalize, to create a performative self distinct from one's authentic self, is precisely what Turturro believes connects actors and sex workers. Both must develop psychological defense mechanisms to protect their core identity from the emotional demands of their profession. Both must appear to enjoy interactions that may internally feel invasive or depleting. What's particularly fascinating is how Turturro's controversial perspective has influenced his directing style. Those who have worked under his direction describe him as unusually protective of actors during vulnerable scenes. He creates these elaborate safety protocols, one actress told my source. Before emotional sequences, he'll have private conversations with performers about how to protect themselves psychologically. He keeps asking, "Are you sure you want to give this much of yourself away?" This protective instinct suggests Turturro isn't merely being provocative. He's genuinely concerned about the psychological welfare of performers. His controversial comparison between acting and sex work isn't meant to shock, but to start a necessary conversation about the emotional labor inherent in performance. The industry pushback against Turturro's views reveals just how threatening this conversation is to the power structures of Hollywood. Executives don't want actors thinking too deeply about the nature of what they're doing, my industry insider explained. The system works because performers are willing to give pieces of themselves away. If too many started questioning that arrangement, the whole model could collapse. But that's nothing compared to what happened when Turturro took his controversial perspective even further. During a masterclass at a prestigious acting school, the recording of which has been suppressed but which my source attended, Turturro spoke directly to aspiring actors about what he called the Faustian bargain of their chosen profession. "You're being trained to access your most private emotions on command," he told the stunned students. "You're learning to make the most intimate parts of yourself available for public consumption. No one is telling you the cost of that transaction." The school's administration was furious. They attempted to have all recordings of the session destroyed and asked attendees to sign non-disclosure agreements. They were terrified his comments would discourage enrollment, my source revealed. Here was one of the most respected actors in the world, essentially telling students they were training to become emotional prostitutes. Yet many of the students found Turturro's honesty refreshing. After the talk, dozens lined up to thank him, my source continued. Many said it was the first time anyone had acknowledged the psychological toll of what they were being asked to do. Some were crying, saying they'd already experienced exactly what he was describing, but thought they were alone in feeling that way. This response hints at why Turturro's controversial take has resonated so deeply within certain circles of the acting community. He's articulating something many performers experience, but few have been willing to name: the sense that there's something inherently exploitative about the actor-audience relationship. The parallels Turturro draws go beyond the emotional aspects of both professions. He's also pointed out the economic similarities, the extreme inequality between those who perform and those who profit from that performance. In both industries, he reportedly said during an interview that was later heavily edited, the people putting their bodies and souls on the line rarely receive fair compensation for what they're giving away. The real money goes to the middlemen, the producers, the studios, the agencies. This economic critique makes Turturro's comparison even more threatening to industry power brokers. It's one thing to make provocative statements about the psychological nature of acting. It's another entirely to question the financial structures that enable some to profit enormously from others' emotional labor. They don't want this getting out, but several major agencies actually discussed dropping Turturro as a client after his comments began circulating. There were serious conversations about whether he had become too much of a liability, my agency source confided. The fear wasn't just about his specific comments, but about the possibility he might inspire other actors to start questioning their own relationships with the industry. What makes Turturro's perspective particularly powerful is that it comes from someone with impeccable artistic credentials. This isn't a failed actor bitter about the industry. This is a celebrated performer whose work has been praised for decades. His willingness to question the very nature of his profession carries weight precisely because he succeeded within the system he's critiquing. A director who has worked closely with Turturro shared something with me that adds another layer to this controversy. John believes the best actors are essentially emotional prostitutes, they revealed. But he doesn't mean that as an insult, quite the opposite. He thinks it requires extraordinary courage and vulnerability to do what great actors do. His critique isn't of the performers, but of an industry that exploits that vulnerability while pretending it's not doing so. This nuance has been largely lost in the reporting around Turturro's controversial comparison. He's not denigrating actors or sex workers. He's questioning the systems that profit from both, while often failing to protect the people doing the actual emotional and physical labor. The aftermath of Turturro's provocative statements continues to reverberate through Hollywood. My sources tell me that several prominent actors have privately reached out to Turturro to express their agreement with his perspective. There's a quiet revolution brewing, one insider suggested. John may have just been the first to say publicly what many have been thinking privately for years. But perhaps the most shocking revelation of all is what Turturro reportedly told a close friend after the controversy had seemingly died down. "The industry's reaction to my comments," he said, "only proved my point. They responded exactly like pimps who feel their business model is being threatened." That incendiary comparison, likening Hollywood power brokers to pimps, has been zealously kept out of the press. "If that quote ever went public," my source whispered, "John would never work in this town again. It crosses the final line no one is supposed to cross." Yet Turturro's willingness to risk his career by speaking these uncomfortable truths raises profound questions about the nature of performance itself. Is authentic acting inherently exploitative? Can the commodification of emotion ever be truly ethical? And if Turturro is right about the parallels between acting and sex work, what responsibility do we as an audience have when consuming these performances? Now that you know the truth about John Turturro's controversial perspective on acting, you might never watch his performances the same way again. Each vulnerable moment, each raw emotional scene takes on new meaning when viewed through the lens of his provocative comparison. But here's what happens next. And it's something no one is talking about. Despite the industry's attempts to silence him, Turturro has quietly continued exploring these themes in his work. My sources close to his recent projects reveal that he's developing a new film that will address these issues head-on. A project so controversial that several financiers have already backed out after learning its true subject matter. It's going to make Fading Gigolo look tame by comparison, one insider revealed. He's creating something that will force everyone in the industry to confront the questions he's been raising. It could either end his career or start a long overdue revolution in how we think about performance. The truth about John Turturro's controversial take on acting isn't just some salacious Hollywood gossip. It's a fundamental challenge to how we understand the relationship between performers and audiences. It asks us to question our own role in a system that commodifies human emotion and vulnerability. But there's one final revelation about Turturro that almost no one knows. Something that explains why this issue resonates so deeply with him. According to someone who's known him for decades, a traumatic experience early in his career left him profoundly disillusioned with the industry. He was asked to do something on set that crossed his personal boundaries, my source confided. When he expressed discomfort, he was essentially told that's what he was being paid for, to give the director what he wanted, regardless of the personal cost. This experience, which Turturro has never discussed publicly, reportedly shaped his entire understanding of the actor-director relationship. It's why he's become such a protective director himself, and why he's willing to risk his standing in the industry to speak these uncomfortable truths. As our understanding of exploitation and emotional labor continues to evolve, Turturro's controversial perspective may eventually be seen not as scandalous, but as prescient. Perhaps future generations will wonder not why he made such a provocative comparison, but why more actors didn't have the courage to say the same thing. The question remains, if John Turturro is right about the true nature of acting, can we ever watch movies and television the same way again? Or are we now complicit in a system we can no longer pretend not to understand? Subscribe now to be the first to know what happens when Turturro's explosive new project is finally revealed, and whether Hollywood will finally be forced to confront the uncomfortable truths he's been brave enough to speak. Estimated duration: 12.6 minutes.